Thank you for your time today. You know, I'm really sorry. It's always great to see you.
It's always good to see you.
I'm sorry we're here under such tragic circumstances. Obviously, it's been a week since the first images came out of precious Khloe Fennell, a little girl who was killed in such a heinous, heinous way. Can you walk us through when you got the call and what you did after that?
Well, for me, I respond almost secondary, right? You can hear the call coming out, but it came out as an overdose. So officers were, they were going to it as an overdose. So it's saving a life. It's, we have fire and EMS responding. And so one of my assistant chiefs and I were just leaving headquarters. And so we're hearing the call come out. And I said, we've got to go run another errand. I said, let's go and start heading that way. And then all of a sudden it changed very quickly, very quickly. And we're not far from the scene. So when we get there, we pull up and it's chaos. So you hear we need 3 and 4 ambulances, and you can tell it's a lot more. And then you hear, I have a child that appears to have gunshot wound. And it changes because every act of violence is just incredibly tragic, senseless. When you hear that a child has fallen victim, I can't really describe what that feels like, just in your gut, in your heart. And so we get there, and my officers are running around, and you can just see on their faces, right, the heartbreak. But they still have a job to do. And so for me, it's more of okay, so what can we do? What can I do? What do you all need? And so we shifted from being there as a police chief and the assistant chief to, okay, so now where do you need us? And we shifted into helping in any way that we could, right? We were still in the process of taking Mr. Luster into custody, and so it was really just happening. So it was tough, and then the notifications have to start, and it's really I don't know how to fully describe what that means, except you just wish it never happened.
In addition to being the chief of police, you're also a mother. So how do you process something like that?
It's hard. It's hard to process. I think for me, my children are older, but I see my children in those children, right? I want to just make perfectly clear that I often think of how are my officers going to feel, and what are they feeling? Because many of them have children that are the age and were the age or are the age of the children that were affected that day, right? And of little Khloe, and then it's how do I help them? And how do I help them process what they've seen? But it's tough. It really is. Because I have a 5-year-old niece. And so Saturday she had a swim meet. And I am watching her swim, and I broke down in tears, because how can I be so happy when there is a mother that is without her 5-year-old? And a 15-year-old that is forever going to be changed. She's a hero, but she's forever going to be changed by what she has experienced. I feel a little guilty for being there in that moment with my 5-year-old niece doing so well, swimming, but knowing that there is a mom and a family that will be without their 5-year-old.
And then how do you ready yourself for the investigation that follows?
So you have to shift and say, okay, so now we have to go to work, because if we are not able to make that shift and be on our game, right, and make sure that we've got all of our I's dotted and the T's crossed, all of this is for nothing. And you want to make sure that you have everything you need to be able to facilitate a successful prosecution. And you want to be the voice for those that can't speak.
You know, the circumstances around Khloe's death are complicated.
Yeah.
The suspect, Brian Luster, that you just mentioned, is her mother's cousin, according to loved ones. Loved ones tell us that she was allowing him to live with her as he was getting himself together. And then this violence happened. So he was going into a home that he had been allowed to stay in. Do you know any intent at this point? Was he going there to hurt those children?
I don't. I don't know. I don't know anything other than kind of what I've just told you. I allow my investigators to focus on the arduous task at hand of piecing everything together to be able to create what happened that day and maybe what caused that to happen. And I will say that there are some things that just simply can never be explained. And I think that's where we all as human beings have a lot of trouble, you know, because we have to find a reason why in a lot of tragedies. And if we can't, or there is really no reason why, that makes it very hard for us to be able to find closure. So I don't. Right now I can tell you that they are still, even though an arrest has been made, the investigation still doesn't stop. It does not stop. You know, in other cases that we've had, you still meet with the district attorney's office. District attorney's office will review the case, and they will look at it from a different lens. So from a prosecutorial lens, you know, what other information do they need to be able to successfully prosecute?
I guess you mentioned, though, that you went there and the call was an overdose. So that meant that there was a call that came out of that house, and then you got there and it was chaos. I mean, does that tell you anything about maybe how things just progressed in such a tragic way?
It can change in a split second. It can change in a split second. I mean, a traffic accident can simply be a traffic accident, but even that can change in a split second when someone decides to make it more than just what it is.
Do you know, or can you tell us, I should say, where he got the weapon from?
I don't know. I don't know. I honestly, when I say to you, I allow my detectives to do their work, I allow them to do their work. You know, I receive debriefs as something breaks. So if something major happens in the case, then I will receive that information. But it's all a part of the investigation.
I think a lot of people in Durham right now are grappling with how something so horrific happened in their city. As the person charged with keeping folks in the Bull City safe, what do you tell them?
What I will say is you can never predict crime and victimization. You can never predict violent crime. If we could, then we wouldn't have any violent crime. We wouldn't have tragedy. Unfortunately, when you wake up in the morning, and this is a cycle of life, you don't know where you're going to be at the end of the day. And that's true for everyone. But what I can say is that, you know, we work very closely with community partners in order to maybe help address the causes of violent crime. There are so many root causes and what lends someone to be more apt to commit violent crime than someone else, or more apt to commit a crime than someone else. And so we're very active in working with community stakeholders to hopefully prevent 1 or 2 or 3 more incidents.
Let's talk about some of the other crimes that we've seen in the city this year, because sadly Khloe's case is not unique in that many young people have been either victims of shootings or have committed shootings themselves.
Yes.
Our data shows roughly a quarter of people shot in Durham this year alone have been under the age of 18. Why are so many young people getting shot?
You know, there's a lot of access to firearms. And certainly this is not me speaking politically, but that's fact, right? There's a lot of access to firearms. Our children are you know, they're every day they're being bombarded with images of violence, or they play games that you know, that manifest violence, right? But really what's interesting is that, you know, children, they are not born to be offenders, right? They are not born to commit offenses, and they're certainly not born to be victims of any crime whatsoever. But what I think happens is that somewhere along the line, our offenders who are juveniles, there's something that happens to them, whether they witness violence or they are victims of crime themselves, and that is never, ever addressed, right? Or simply they just don't have someone that tells them and shows them their worth. Our kids have a lot of weight on their shoulders. You know, I've met children that are 15 and 16 years old that they are really living and making adult decisions. That's not fair. That's not fair. So there's just more to it than just what we see, right? There are a lot of root causes, and it's not and it's not going to be something that we'll fix overnight, or maybe in 2 years, in 3 years. I mean, you almost have to take children from the time that they are wrapped up in some sort of traumatic situation, right? Whether it's through witnessing it or surviving a traumatic situation. And you have to really surround them with services that will last them through their lives.
Because you are seeing the young people who are doing this, you can almost always pinpoint that there was something traumatic
Yes.
in their life.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Is there a common theme in terms of what these kids might be doing, you know, before the crime? Are they involved with gangs? Is there some common theme among these young people?
I wish I could say yes. It would make it a lot easier for us to be able to at least isolate it and address it. I don't feel that there is a commonality, right? Again, it's about the choices that they're making, but oftentimes those choices, they may not have a choice in that, right? We see the world as in this is right and this is wrong. But if you choose something right and you could face worse repercussions for going the right direction, you're going to choose wrong because you don't want to be, you don't want to seek or have repercussions sought against you. I mean, it's just very hard for them. The peer pressure, what is love? How does it feel to be loved? How does it feel to know that you are more than what in this moment, what you are? You're born to be more than where you are. Your existence is grounded in greatness. I had a conversation with a 15-year-old several weeks ago that that was in the back of a patrol car. And it was a tough conversation for me. And what I told him was, I said, you are not my child. I said, and there are many people out here that you don't know that love you. I said, you're not my child, but I love you like you were mine. And I said, you were born to be better than this. And it visibly affected him. And I remember once he got out of the patrol car, he looked at me, and it was probably one of the most incredible moments. And I don't know where he is now. That's tough. It was almost like he had never heard, I love you. Yeah.
Wow. And he didn't say anything, but it was the look.
It was the look.
You know, police work already is hard. I can see that on the faces of officers. But dealing with crimes toward children, what toll is that taking on your officers?
A tremendous toll. You know, officers will say, it's fine, we're fine, I'm good, I'm this, I'm that, right? Because we have been, we have almost been conditioned to push it down. Because guess what? There's another call coming out, so push it down, push it down. To the point where you can potentially become numb to what's happening. And so we have to work, and we, meaning at the police department, work very hard to making sure, or at least creating an environment where it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to come forward and say, I'm not okay. You know, to provide those services. We have a great peer support group that went into immediate action last week. And when an officer says, or doesn't say, but watching their body language that they're not okay, it's, you know, saying, you know what, we've got this. Go home, we're gonna check on you. Take a moment, take a beat, just go, you know, it's not okay, you're not okay. I can see it. And them knowing that that's not the end of their career. You know, it's not because you say you're not okay, it doesn't mean that you can never be a police officer anymore. It's quite the opposite. We want to make sure that you'll be able to be okay so you can continue to be a part of this profession.
I'm sure compounding the issue for you is staffing shortages, the staffing challenges that you've had. You've been pretty blunt speaking before City Council about, you know, your concerns, for instance, over response times to serious calls. You said it's the worst you've seen it. Is that improving? Where is that now?
So we measure that on a quarterly basis, and we've been fortunate that, you know, our officers recognize that, but we also have been able to implement strategies that actually put more staff out on the road taking calls. Now, the effect that that's had is we've essentially had to say, right now, our focus is uniform patrol and placing more officers on uniform patrol, whether it's, you know, we right now we're doing our rotations of riding on patrol. We have consistent supplemental patrol, and we're able to really help shift and provide them support. And I think that goes a long way towards keeping, or at least trying to keep, our response times down. Now, I will say to you that we do have to reassess, is 5 minutes and, you know, 48 seconds or 38 seconds, is that a realistic response time in today's world with the growth that we have had, that we've experienced in the city of Durham? The city of Durham has grown tremendously from the last 10 years. But is that a realistic number for us? Because the call volume has increased, the priority calls have increased, and I really do believe that there's an opportunity for us to really shift our focus on, is that time realistic for us? And again, is there more we could be doing to make sure we have patrol officers actually working?
Yeah, we've gotten calls from people who say they've called police. It's taken them 10, 20, 30 minutes. What message do you want to tell the people in Durham today about if they need police, whether they'll get that help?
They will always get that help. And here's what I'll say, is one, if you are experiencing where it's taken 10, 20, 30 minutes, want to know about that, because one, I want to know what kind of call it was. And I'm going to kind of take a moment and speak on behalf of my 911 communications director, Mr. Randy Beeman. Calls that come in are prioritized. So there's a priority P call, right? That's kind of your in progress, think life-threatening, and then they kind of go down. And calls are prioritized and dispatched according to what that call, the nature of that call is. So if it's taken 20 minutes and 30 minutes, I would really be interested in knowing what kind of call was it. Did you call and say that your home had gotten broken into, you'd been gone on vacation, and it appears your home had gotten broken into? That's a different priority than I'm shot. And the I'm shot calls receives immediate response, meaning if I have an officer that's on their way to a lower priority call, they're going to be pulled off of that call. And that's whether or not we are fully staffed at 100%, or we're staffed less than that. They're always going to receive that priority to life-threatening calls.
But people will get the help they need.
Absolutely.
When they call.
Absolutely.
It just may take a little longer if it's not
a life-threatening
situation.
Correct. Yes.
I want to talk about something else you mentioned to City Council about your ability to solve these crimes.
Yes.
So when it comes to homicides, you mentioned there's been a ton of progress. And, you said something interesting, actually. You said it's hard to be happy about solving crimes when there is so much crime in Durham. And yet, when it comes to other types of crimes, you all are still, you have work to do. But you specifically mentioned cooperation with the community and said, right now that's lacking. Can you talk about that? What's lacking? What are people not doing that you need them to do to solve some crimes?
Well, if they're a victim, so if we have, and this happened not too long ago, someone was shot, and we're trying to ask them, who did it, or where were you? Either it's, we're not going to tell you, we don't know, or I don't know, or they send us on a wild goose chase, right? And all we're wanting to do is to help, right? That's all we're wanting to do. And so that's kind of the frustration. Now, it doesn't mean that when you tell us you're not going to cooperate with us that we stop our investigation. It just means that it's going to take longer, but we're going to continue to investigate, because one of the things that I am very proud of, one of the many things, is the work that our investigators are doing, in addition to the work that our patrol officers are doing. But the investigators and our intelligence team, they're able to really backtrack and use some very creative resources in which to solve crimes that, quite frankly, I thought were unsolvable. And so we've been able to surprisingly maintain a really great clearance rate. And I always say that, and again, I say it's hard for me to say that because I know that there are victims who either have not, the people that victimize them have not been brought to justice, or, are survivors. Their families are waiting for justice. So where there's a clearance rate, there's also something that has not been cleared.
Mm-hmm. You said it's around 30%?
Yes.
You're hoping...
So our overall violent crime clearance rate is 31%, which is slightly above the national average as captured by the FBI in 2020.
Is there something you're doing now that you've done, because you've only been chief, not even 2 years now, but is there something in terms of an approach that you think that you all are doing that's helping to improve that clearance rate?
Yes. So I will tell you, I am but the conduit. I didn't do anything. My team does a fantastic job of working and sitting down and saying, okay, so what can we do to really be a force multiplier? And so one of my deputy chiefs sat down with her investigators, and they reorganized our criminal investigations division. We knew we were experiencing an increase in violent crime to include homicide. We also knew that our homicide teams were exhausted to the point that we were rotating them out because mentally they were just very drained. And so we created 4 large violent and homicide crime teams. And that actually put more investigators that respond to a homicide or another violent crime that will actually respond. And so they're able to work more efficient. It's putting more officers there. And we also have attached our victim advocates to those teams so that we can start somewhat the process of addressing trauma, but also start providing resources so for after what happens after. And they've done a great job with that, and I think that that's helped with the clearance rates.
I want to get back to the staffing shortages, though, because just thinking about, you have 4 large teams working specifically on homicides. You have said that, about 20% of positions are open at DPD
Yes.
right now? Is that still the case?
So we are currently 122 vacancies, and that's out of 534 fully staffed. We have 122 vacancies.
That's a lot. Mm-hmm. Look, I've seen your posts on social media, posting videos. I've seen the billboards going up to say
great.
that you got some hiring bonuses.
Yes.
I've seen you have a cash incentive now
Yes.
for employees, for
Yes.
referrals. I mean, are any of those things making a difference?
Yes, so they are. But unfortunately, when we onboard a candidate, it takes a year because we run our own basic law enforcement training. And we train, our training is rigorous, right? It takes a year from the time that we bring them on through the academy into field training until the time that they can actually ride on their own. So when I say yes, it's making a difference, I'm seeing more candidates coming into the police department front doors and being seated for an academy class. And that's always a great thing. We know that we're not going to graduate 100%, but the more that we can get in, the more that we'll be able to graduate. And that's helpful. Officers are becoming more involved in recruiting, whether or not you're assigned to the recruiting team or not. The $5,000 incentive has been very helpful because officers are the biggest recruiters for the department. Our non-sworn staff, they were the biggest recruiters for the department. And so we want to recognize and reward that effort.
But in the interim, you're short-staffed.
We are short. We are short. But, officers realize that. We realize that. But we're committed to continuing to answer the call. We were sworn to serve and protect our community, and that's what we are going to do, and that's what we will continue to do.
How's morale, though?
You'll have to ask them. I mean, here's what I'll say to you, is that every year I personally go and meet with every one of my staff. So every single patrol officer, every single, and we started at about January, and we do weekend meetings and meetings in between with our sworn and our non-sworn staff. I can tell you that's helped. Officer morale, I will tell you, our officers don't want to leave Durham. They love Durham, but they also have families, right? And there's also they're overworked, right? And they don't want to leave, but they're not leaving because they hate Durham or they don't want to be here. It's a life decision that they have to make. It's a survival decision.
Let's talk about one factor they may be considering in that decision, which is pay. We know at City Council, there were a lot of public comment. We heard from officers, and I guess the decision was to come up with a pay study.
Yes.
And evaluate how much officers should be paid more. How do you go back to your officers and say, well, let's just wait for this pay study to happen, and then we'll see, maybe you'll get an increase in salary? How does that land with your officers?
So most of them were watching. They rarely ever watch a council meeting, but they were watching that night, and those series of council meetings. So what I know is happening is that the market study is being done. And, there has been a commitment, because our manager recognizes, and council also recognizes, that one, you have to be great stewards of the funds, of taxpayer dollars. And you can't throw money at a problem if you don't really have an end game, right? If you don't have a long-term plan. And in order to get there, there has to be the market study. It's hard. It's hard because officers, we want money now. We need this. We don't want to leave. We don't want to leave our agency. And ultimately, the message is that we will continue internally to look for incentives to keep you here. So whether it's our take-home car program or doing more training. So officers have wanted more training and time off to be able to take that training. And so we've been able to do that. There are internal things and internal structures that we've put into place in order to make that news sting a little less. Our officers are our greatest resource. Officers are the greatest part about the Durham Police Department and about the city of Durham. Unfortunately, there is a risk that you take in this market of law enforcement, right? We constantly see jurisdictions around us raising their pay. When does it get to be to the point where you can't keep up, right? It's it's a competitive market. And I always tell my staff is that I can tell you that I feel very strongly that the manager values you and wants to ensure that all of City and Durham employees are compensated fairly and at market rate. And so but we have to know what market rate is for Durham, and in order to do that, there has to be a proper study done.
Okay, so you're doing everything you can internally to keep the officers.
Yes.
But at a certain point, it's going to be out of your control. Certain things are.
Yes.
That tough for you?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's tough for me. Mentally, that's very hard for me. I've come to a place where there are things that I can control and things that I can't, that I don't have control over. This falls into the realm of I don't have control over that. But the things that I do have control over, which is, let's see, can we do more employee appreciation events? Is there an opportunity for us to redo our gym and make, is there low-hanging fruit? Is there something, what can I control? Because I can't live in the world of things I can't control. Because if I stay there, it will defeat me. And then I will be failing my officers, and I will not do that.
You take on a lot, I can tell. I mean, you're the chief, the buck stops with you, but I can tell that you are incredibly passionate about what you do, and you care very much for your officers.
Every last one of them, and my non-SWORD staff. There isn't anything I wouldn't do for them.
I wanted to ask a question about the Brian Luster, the suspect in Khloe Fennell's case, because I thought it was something that you would also find interesting in terms of what we found in his criminal history.
Okay.
And he has a history of violence, particularly against women. We found at least 3 women filed restraining orders against him. In at least 2 cases, in those protective orders, they weren't completed because the women didn't show up in court. And that's something that we have seen with domestic violence victims.
Yes.
What runs through your head when you hear something like that about, one, his violence toward women, and also about the fact that women were so afraid they couldn't show up in court?
Well, it's really an inward look. So what is it that we didn't do and our courts didn't do to facilitate those women coming and seeing it through? You know, is there something that we could have done better? It's hard to, statistics show that a woman that has been a victim of domestic abuse, they will leave and return to their abuser 7 times. 7 times. Abuse mentally, it really does become almost a mental illness, right? Because you feel guilty leaving and calling the police and then doing these and then seeing them go to jail, and then, maybe it'll get better this time. Maybe it will be better this time. What it shows to me is that we have to put more advocacy into our victim services. We really have to advocate more for our victims. We have to really find out, what can we do to make you feel more comfortable with following through so that it will help us protect you. I think that's a larger discussion about where are we at in our community with our support for our victims.
What's your message to domestic violence victims? That's what ran through my head when I read that. What can you tell them about how critical it is to come forward and to complete the process, and that they'll be protected if they do so?
So this is what I will say is that, we understand victimization is not I'm a victim one day and not a victim the next day. You will always be a victim until you become a survivor. And I think the most important process, or the most important message is that we want to be able to help. And we are here, no matter how many times it takes, but we are here to help. But we don't want you to become a statistic. And there are very few times where domestic violence has ended well. It can escalate, it most often will escalate, but you have to make plans to get out, and we can help with that. We can help with that. And it's hard. Often, I also, start to think about our sexual assault victims. It's why should I report? You're not going to believe me. You should report because, 1, you have been victimized and it is not your fault. But 2, is that person could potentially victimize someone else.
And we saw that.
And you have to want it to stop.
We saw that with Khloe. Chief, is there anything else you want to say about, you know, this precious little girl, or the investigation, or just something to the community, which is really hurting after this?
Wrap your arms around her family. Grieve with Khloe's family. Be there to support Khloe's family. And then move to action. How are you going to make our community better? What are you going to do to make our community better? And hopefully we won't have any more Khloes. And take care of yourself.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. Take care of yourself. Yeah.
You too.